The story begins at a time when the Earth is gripped by the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, though its influence stretches back tens of millennia earlier and lingers for thousands after. During this long cold age, ice sheets spread outward from the poles, covering much of North America, northern Europe, and Asia, with walls of frozen mass. They are kilometers thick in places, reshaping landscapes beneath their weight. With so much water locked in ice, sea levels fall dramatically over 100 meters lower than today. Coastlines extend far beyond their present reach. Continental shelves are laid bare and vast. New lands appear, where now there is only ocean. The planet as a whole takes on a different form, one of exposed plains and shrunken seas. This is a world both familiar and strange, one that sets the stage for human journeys into the Americas. The lowering of the seas reveals hidden connections between continents. Among the most significant is Beringia, the immense landmass that links Siberia to Alaska. At its greatest extent, this land bridge stretches more than 1,000 kilometers across and reaches hundreds of kilometers from north to south, wide enough to hold entire ecosystems. It is not a narrow path, but a world in itself, a region of tundra and steppe, dotted with rivers, lakes, and patches of boreal woodland. The land supports great herds of grazing animals: mammoths, steppe bison, wild horses, musk ox, and caribou. Alongside them roam predators such as wolves, cave lions, and short-faced bears. Humans are part of this web, finding opportunity and challenge in a cold but living environment. One well-established fact from geology is that sea levels dropped by more than 120 meters during the coldest phases, and this alone is enough to explain the exposure of the land bridge. Yet, it is not only the depth of water that matters, but also the distribution of ice sheets across North America. Their growth and retreat dictate whether human passage is possible, whether ice corridors open or remain closed. The Great Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets advance and merge, sealing off central routes and then withdraw, leaving temporary paths. These shifts create alternating windows of isolation and connection, shaping the opportunities for migration into the Americas. A lesser-known detail is that Beringia itself may have been a kind of refugium, a place where life could persist even as surrounding areas grew harsher. Pollen cores taken from ancient lakebeds in Alaska and Siberia show that some pockets of spruce and birch survived the cold, providing shelter and fuel. There are indications that humans too found long-term refuge here, remaining for centuries before pushing deeper into the new continent. This idea of a Beringian standstill, supported by genetic evidence, suggests that the people who would one day populate the Americas may have spent thousands of years in this northern realm before the opportunity for southward migration appeared. Despite advances in archaeology and genetics, many mysteries remain. One of the enduring questions is, when exactly humans first crossed into the Americas? Evidence from stone tools, bones, and genetic studies sometimes conflicts. Some researchers argue for entry as early as 25,000 years ago, while others hold to a date closer to 15,000 years ago. The uncertainty reflects both the difficulty of preserving material in such cold, shifting environments and the challenge of interpreting fragmentary clues. Sites along former coastlines are now submerged, making them hard to locate. What lies beneath the Bering Strait remains largely hidden from investigation. Thus, the precise timing of the first steps into the Americas remains unresolved, though the broader picture of human presence in Beringia is clear. On the planetary scale, the Ice Age transforms not only the land bridge, but the entire global system. The redistribution of water alters ocean circulation, shifting currents and influencing climate worldwide. Deserts expand in some regions, while others receive greater rainfall. The pattern of wind, the migration of animals, and even the spread of vegetation across continents are connected to the waxing and waning of ice. The Earth breathes in a different rhythm, one of long cycles of glaciation and interglacial warmth. Against this backdrop of planetary change, the journey into the Americas unfolds as a single thread in a much larger tapestry of global transformations. To grasp the scale of this migration, it helps to consider distances. The width of Beringia at its broadest rivals the distance between London and Moscow, a span across which entire communities might live their lives without reaching the far side. For those who crossed it, the journey southward into the Americas would ultimately cover thousands of kilometers, greater than the length of the Nile or the Andes. Movement on this scale does not occur quickly. It takes generations, perhaps millennia, with families advancing step by step, camp by camp, following the rhythms of seasons and herds. Archaeological traces from Siberia and Alaska show the tools and habits of people adapted to these extremes. Stone flakes carefully struck from prepared cores, bone needles for sewing hides into warm clothing, and hearths blackened with charcoal speak to a knowledge of survival in the cold. The tools resemble those of their relatives in Northeast Asia, yet over time they take on unique local forms. Each adaptation reflects the particular challenges of Beringia: the need for efficient hunting of large mammals, the importance of firewood in treeless plains, and the crafting of shelters against relentless winds. The human story in this frozen landscape is inseparable from that of the animals. Mammoth tusks unearthed from permafrost show cut marks from stone tools, evidence of hunting or scavenging. Bones of bison and horse are found in the same contexts. These remains tell of subsistence strategies focused on large game, supported by knowledge of migration routes and seasonal patterns. Yet humans also gather plants, fish in rivers, and trap smaller animals, weaving a broad net of resources to sustain life. Each element of the ecosystem is part of the human presence in Beringia, and each reflects the careful balance required to endure. As the world remains locked in ice, people continue to adapt. Fires burn through long Arctic nights. Children are born and raised in skin tents anchored against the wind. Knowledge is passed from elders to youth, where the rivers flow, where the caribou move, how to knap stone in cold so sharp it cracks rock. In this continuity, life persists across millennia of glacial dominance. The humans who live here do not see themselves as poised at the threshold of continents. They simply inhabit their world as others have always done. But from the perspective of deep time, this frozen world is the setting for one of the greatest expansions in human history. The stage is thus prepared. A planet shaped by ice, seas drawn back to reveal hidden lands, a corridor between continents alive with herds and hunters. The world is locked in ice, yet within this frozen order lies the pathway by which humans will enter the Americas. The emergence of Beringia is one of the most remarkable consequences of the Ice Age, a reshaping of continents through the slow and silent lowering of the seas. As glaciers expand across the northern hemisphere, they draw vast quantities of water out of the oceans, enough to expose continental shelves that today lie hidden beneath waves. In the far north, this process brings into being a landmass larger than many modern nations, a plain connecting Asia and North America. It is not simply a narrow strip of land, but an expansive region, 1,000 kilometers wide at times, stretching from the Lena River in Siberia to the Yukon in Alaska. This is Beringia, a bridge between worlds, and for thousands of years it endures as both a barrier and a passageway. Across its tundra steppe and scattered woodland plants and animals adapt to the extreme conditions of the late Pleistocene. The climate here is cold, but not uniform, shaped by shifting winds and the presence of great ice sheets to the south. Summers are brief, winters long, yet the land sustains rich grasslands that support large herds. Mammoths with curved tusks, bison with massive shoulders, wild horses, reindeer, and musk ox graze widely, creating one of the most productive steppe ecosystems on Earth. Predators roam, too wolves, lions, and bears, and their movements, like those of the herds, leave deep impressions on the rhythm of life. Humans who eventually enter this world step into an environment already shaped by countless generations of animal migration. Geological studies confirm the scale of this transformation. Core samples taken from the floor of the Bering Sea show layers of sediment, rich in pollen from grasses and herbs, clear evidence of exposed land once carrying vegetation. Fossil bones of grazing animals have been dredged from what is now seabed, further proof of a once living landscape. The land bridge is not an empty wasteland, but a place where entire ecosystems flourish, providing food and opportunity for humans willing to adapt. This plain is not static, however. It waxes and wanes with the cycles of ice. During colder periods when glaciers grow, the seas retreat further and Beringia widens. During warmer intervals, ice melts, seas rise, and the land narrows. Over millennia, the shape of this bridge shifts repeatedly, its geography rewritten by the planet's climate. A lesser-known detail of Beringia lies in its role as a meeting ground for diverse plant and animal lineages. Genetic studies of bison, for example, show that populations from Asia and North America intermingled here, creating hybrid herds that spread in both directions. The same is likely true for other species, making Beringia a zone of exchange long before humans crossed it. Even today, the genetics of some Arctic plants and animals carry signatures of this ancient mingling. A reminder that the land bridge was once a place of biological blending. Yet much about Beringia remains uncertain. One of the greatest mysteries concerns the conditions humans encountered when they first arrived. Did they face endless windswept plains, or were there patches of woodland and marsh to offer shelter? The archaeological record is sparse, partly because so much of Beringia now lies beneath the waters of the Bering Strait. Submerged sites may hold answers, but until they are discovered, reconstructions rely on indirect evidence from surviving sediments and fossils. Some scholars suggest that Beringia was relatively mild compared to surrounding glaciated regions, a northern oasis where people and animals could endure even at the height of the Ice Age. Others argue it was more forbidding, demanding great resilience from those who stayed. The full picture is still debated, a puzzle built from fragments scattered across continents. On a planetary scale, Beringia exemplifies how the Earth's systems link oceans, ice, and land in a delicate balance. The drop in sea level that exposed this land bridge was global, affecting every coastline. Vast tracts of land appeared in Southeast Asia, connecting islands into the continent of Sundaland, while in the Mediterranean, new shorelines extended outward. The exposure of Beringia is thus part of a worldwide reshaping of landscapes, all tied to the rhythm of glacial cycles. It is a reminder that human migrations occur not in isolation, but within the larger dynamics of a changing planet. To appreciate the scale of Beringia, imagine a journey across its breadth. From the Lena River to the Mackenzie, the distance is greater than from Madrid to Moscow, a span across which entire lifetimes could pass without reaching the far horizon. Rivers cut across this plain, some flowing north into the Arctic Ocean, others south toward the Pacific. Lakes dotted the landscape, providing water and fish, while marshlands offered migratory birds in season. For humans moving across this space, each valley and waterway presented both resource and obstacle shaping routes of travel that stretched over generations. Archaeological traces at the edges of Beringia give glimpses of the people who ventured there. In Siberia, sites like Yana RHS, dating to around 32,000 years ago, reveal hunters who adapted to Arctic life, crafting tools of stone and ivory and fashioning ornaments from mammoth bone. On the Alaskan side, later sites preserve hearths, flakes of stone from toolmaking and animal bones bearing cut marks. These scattered remains show continuity in human presence across millennia, though the precise pathways are not always clear. Each artifact is a marker of adaptation, a testament to the ingenuity required to live in such demanding conditions. The making of Beringia also shaped human genetics in ways still detectable today. Studies of ancient and modern DNA reveal that the ancestors of indigenous peoples of the Americas carry signatures of a long stay in this region, a pause in their journey before moving south. This genetic standstill is consistent with the idea that Beringia was not merely a corridor, but a homeland for many generations. Here, isolated from other populations by ice sheets and distance, their lineages diverged and formed the foundation for the peoples who would later spread throughout the Americas. Day by day, year by year, the environment of Beringia demanded resilience. Families gathered fuel in a land with few trees, using driftwood or bone for fire. They built shelters of hide, stretched over frames, anchored with stone against the wind. They stitched warm clothing with bone needles, essential for survival in sub-zero winters. Children learned early how to read the tracks of animals, when to set snares, and how to find food beneath snow. Such knowledge accumulated over centuries, transmitted through generations in this harsh yet sustaining landscape. In the stillness of the Ice Age, Beringia stands as both bridge and world. It links continents, but also supports its own communities, animals, and ecosystems. The making of this land is a geological process, slow and vast, yet its significance for human history is immense. Without it, the movement into the Americas would have been far more difficult, perhaps impossible at that time. With it, a pathway existed, a plain broad enough to carry herds, rivers, and human lives. As long as the world remained locked in ice, Beringia endured a silent threshold between Asia and America. Across the breadth of Beringia stretches a vast biome known as the Mammoth Steppe, an ecological zone unlike anything seen in the world today. It extends from Western Europe through Siberia, across the land bridge, and into North America, forming a continuous belt of grassland and tundra that flourishes in the cold, dry conditions of the late Pleistocene. This steppe is sustained by low precipitation and long winters, yet the brief summers bring enough sunlight to grow hardy grasses, sedges, and flowering plants. These support herds of grazing animals in numbers that rival or surpass those of the African savanna. The Mammoth Steppe is one of the richest large animal ecosystems of the Ice Age, and humans moving into it encounter both abundance and peril. Towering mammoths wander in groups, their sweeping tusks and thick coats adapted to the climate. Bison, wild horses, reindeer, and muskox graze in herds that can stretch across the horizon. Predators follow wolves with thick pelts, cave lions powerful and lean, and the formidable short-faced bear, a giant carnivore that dominates in North America. This environment provides immense resources, but it also requires deep knowledge to survive. To hunt a mammoth is to risk everything, yet to follow herds of smaller ungulates offers more reliable food. Archaeological remains show that humans exploit both adapting tools and strategies to match the opportunities the land provides. Geological and faunal evidence confirms the richness of this steppe. Permafrost preserves bones in astonishing condition, from mammoth tusks still marked by human tools to frozen carcasses with flesh intact. Isotope studies of these remains reveal diets of grasses and shrubs, consistent with the spread of open plains. Even pollen grains trapped in ancient soils confirm the dominance of grasses, sedges, and hardy flowering plants. Together, these strands of evidence create a picture of a thriving biome that sustained countless generations of humans and animals alike. A lesser-known detail of this environment is the presence of micro-habitats within the larger steppe. Along rivers, willow and birch thickets provide firewood and shelter. Around lakes and marshes, fish and waterfowl add variety to diets otherwise dominated by meat. Seasonal berries and edible roots grow in protected spots, supplementing the calories obtained from game. Such resources are rarely visible in the broad reconstructions of Ice Age life, but they were vital for survival. The Mammoth Steppe is not uniform emptiness, but a mosaic of niches, each offering something different to human communities who learn to recognize and exploit them. Yet despite these insights, mysteries endure. One of the most persistent is how humans organized their subsistence in such a vast and unpredictable environment. Did they depend primarily on large game hunting, or did smaller animals and gathered plants play a greater role than the archaeological record suggests? Bones of mammoth and bison dominate sites, but this may reflect preservation biases rather than true dependence. Organic remains of plants and small creatures decay, quickly leaving an incomplete record. Without a full picture, debates continue about the precise balance of diets on the mammoth steppe. Another mystery lies in the dynamics of extinction. Many of the great mammals that once roamed here vanish at the end of the Pleistocene. Whether human hunting, climate change, or a combination of both caused their decline remains unresolved, and the mammoth steppe itself disappears as climates warm and forests expand. The ecosystem that supports early migrations into the Americas is ultimately temporary, a product of the Ice Age that will not survive its end. On the planetary scale, the mammoth steppe reflects the interplay of climate and vegetation across continents. Lowered sea levels, altered precipitation, and colder temperatures combine to create vast expanses of grassland. This biome links distant regions into a single ecological system. From France to Canada, species move across thousands of kilometers, sometimes crossing from one continent to another over Beringia. The steppe is not bound by modern borders, but is instead a planetary phenomenon shaped by global climate cycles. For humans, its continuity means that knowledge gained in one place, how to hunt reindeer, how to prepare hides, how to build shelters, can be applied in another. To appreciate the scale of life on the mammoth steppe, consider a herd of bison numbering in the thousands. Their migration can stretch farther than the distance from Berlin to Rome. To follow them requires not only stamina, but planning, for they may move beyond reach in days. For people living on the steppe, movement is constant, dictated by the cycles of herds and the seasons of the year. Campsites are established along rivers or near ridges, where game passes and then abandoned when resources shift. Archaeological sites such as Yana in Siberia, Bluefish Caves in the Yukon, and Swan Point in Alaska reveal traces of these lives. At Yana, beads made of ivory suggest ornamentation, a sign that even in harsh climates, people create symbols as well as tools. At Bluefish, bones with cut marks show butchery of horse and caribou, evidence of subsistence strategies. At Swan Point, hearths and stone tools mark the presence of families who relied on local game. These sites, though fragmentary, demonstrate the resilience of humans who live amid the mammoth steppe. Tools adapted to this world are varied and specialized. Long blades struck from carefully prepared cores, bone points hardened by fire, and needles carved from ivory all point to sophisticated technology. Clothing sewn from animal hides is essential in temperatures that can plunge far below freezing. Shelters are constructed of hides stretched over frames of wood or bone, sometimes partially dug into the ground to resist wind. Fire remains central, not only for warmth and cooking, but for social gatherings and the transmission of knowledge. Each element of technology reflects deep adaptation to the demands of the steppe. The relationship between humans and animals is central to this life. Mammoth bones show signs of both hunting and scavenging, with marks from stone blades etched into their surfaces. Some remains indicate selective use of tusks, not only for tools, but perhaps also for symbolic purposes. Bison bones are split for marrow, a calorie-rich resource. Reindeer provide hides for clothing and sinew for sewing. Horses yield both meat and bone tools. Every part of an animal has a place in human survival, and the skills to use them are passed from one generation to the next. In the stillness of the mammoth steppe, life is precarious but also abundant. Fires flicker in the dark smoke rising into cold skies. Children learn the routes of herds, the shapes of tracks, and the signs of weather. Elders carry memories of past migrations, guiding groups toward rivers that freeze later, or valleys where caribou gather. Knowledge accumulates slowly, rooted in observation of the land. Against the immense backdrop of the Ice Age, each small decision, where to camp, when to hunt, how to divide meat, becomes part of the continuity of life. For thousands of years, this steppe endures as one of the richest stages of human existence. It is both a home and a highway, sustaining communities and allowing movement across continents. In the balance of grasses, herds, and hunters lies the foundation for the next steps into the Americas. The Mammoth Steppe is more than a landscape. It is a world entire, vast, cold, and fleeting, its memory preserved in bones, tools, and the genes of those who passed through it. From the heart of Siberia, human groups begin moving eastward, step by step, generation after generation, carried by the rhythm of seasons and the shifting fortunes of game. This expansion is not a sudden journey, but a gradual spread, a process unfolding over millennia, as families follow rivers, valleys, and the paths of reindeer and bison. Archaeological evidence places humans deep within Arctic Siberia as early as 30,000 years ago, at sites such as Yana River, where tools of stone and ivory beads and hunting debris reveal adaptation to high-latitude life. These groups are not strangers to the cold. They already know how to build shelters against wind, how to sew warm garments from reindeer hides, and how to keep fires alive through endless winter nights. Their skills make possible a slow but steady drift eastward toward the vast plains of Beringia. A well-established fact from archaeology is the presence of stone tool traditions that can be traced across this movement. Blades struck from long prepared cores known as microblades appear in Siberia and later in early Alaskan sites, showing continuity across thousands of kilometers. These tools, sharp and efficient, allow the creation of composite implements, arrows, darts, and spears, tipped with small stone inserts set into bone or wood. Such technology provides flexibility in hunting large animals across the steppes, enabling groups to follow herds across open terrain. The spread of microblade technology is one of the clearest material traces of this eastward journey, linking Asia and America in a continuous archaeological record. Alongside these familiar tools, lesser-known traces provide glimpses of the lives of those who traveled. At sites in Siberia, pendants made of animal teeth, beads carved from ivory, and engraved bones hint at symbolic traditions carried with them. These small ornaments suggest a shared world of meaning, of social identity, perhaps even of storytelling. Their presence in Arctic contexts shows that even in the harshest climates, people devote time and effort to symbolic expression. It is a reminder that migration is not only a matter of subsistence, but also of culture, carried forward into new lands. Yet mysteries remain, particularly regarding the pace and pattern of this eastward movement. Did people advance in small groups exploring new territories season by season, or did larger waves move when climates allowed? The sparse archaeological record makes it difficult to know. Some genetic studies suggest pulses of migration at different times, while others argue for a more continuous presence in the northeast. The possibility of multiple movements into Beringia complicates the picture, raising questions about how many groups arrived, how long they stayed, and how they interacted with each other. These uncertainties reflect the fragmentary nature of the evidence scattered across a landscape, now partly submerged beneath seas and buried under permafrost. On the planetary scale, the eastward drift of humans mirrors broader patterns of expansion already underway. By this time, humans have spread across Africa into Europe and far into Asia. Some have reached Sahul, the continent that includes Australia and New Guinea, through water crossings tens of thousands of years earlier. Others live in deserts, forests, and coasts across Eurasia. The movement toward Beringia is one branch of a larger story, a global unfolding of human presence across every habitable land. It is part of a pattern of dispersal that reshapes ecosystems and connects distant continents in new ways. To grasp the scale of this eastward movement, one might imagine the distance from Lake Baikal to the Yukon, a span greater than from Paris to Beijing. Crossing such expanses is not the achievement of a single lifetime, but the cumulative result of many generations, each pushing a little further, each learning from the land, each adapting tools and strategies to new conditions. Children born in one valley grow to hunt in another, and their children in turn move beyond until the edge of the continent is reached. Archaeological traces along this route show continuity in knowledge, but also adaptation to local conditions. In regions of open steppe, tools are shaped for hunting large grazers. In river valleys, fishing implements appear. Hearths built with stone rings mark campsites, while bone needles reveal the importance of tailored clothing. In some places, mammoth bones are used to construct shelters, a practical response where wood is scarce. Each site offers a glimpse of resilience of choices made in response to immediate surroundings. The eastward journey is as much about learning as it is about movement. Genetic studies reveal further details of this process. DNA from ancient remains in Siberia shows connections to both Western Eurasian and East Asian populations, indicating a mixing of lineages before the movement into Beringia. The people who carry genes into the Americas are not isolated, but are themselves the product of earlier encounters and exchanges. Their ancestry reflects the complexity of human history long before the crossing of continents. The eastward movement thus weaves together genetic threads from across Eurasia, bringing them to the threshold of a new world. Daily life during these movements must have been a balance between opportunity and challenge. Hunters track herds across snow and tundra, setting traps or driving animals toward waiting spears. Families gather around fires in shelters made of hide bone and wood. Children learn by watching, by imitation, by trial and error. Elders recall routes and seasons, passing knowledge through spoken words and gestures. The environment demands constant vigilance, for weather shifts rapidly. Predators stalk the same herds, and resources are never guaranteed. Yet despite these challenges, humans persist, moving gradually eastward until the Pacific lies before them and Beringia stretches wide. The mammoth steppe here is both familiar and new, offering the same herds and grasses, yet with differences in species and climate. The first steps into this region mark the beginning of a new chapter, one that will eventually lead into the Americas. For now, the journey is still eastward across plains, swept by winds, beneath skies lit by northern stars. From the perspective of deep time, these movements are not hurried, but steady, measured against the turning of seasons and the cycles of ice. In this way, humans continue their slow spread across the planet, carrying tools, memories, and genes into the farthest reaches of the north. The first steps eastward are thus not a single event, but a drawn-out process of exploration, adaptation, and persistence. It is a story written in stone tools, in bones, cut by human hands, in the genetics of living peoples, and in the sediments of ancient campsites. It is a story still incomplete, full of gaps and mysteries, but clear enough to show that by the time ice sheets cover much of North America, humans are already established in Beringia, ready for the next stage of their journey. At the margins of the great northern ice sheets, humans begin to establish camps that balance opportunity with risk. Here in the transition zones, where the mammoth steppe gives way to walls of ice, the environment offers both abundant resources and formidable challenges. The ice sheets that dominate North America during the last glacial maximum rise like frozen continents of their own, the Laurentide, stretching across much of Canada and the Cordilleran covering the western mountains. Together they form barriers hundreds of kilometers wide, their edges advancing and retreating with climate shifts. At these boundaries, meltwater rivers carve channels, seasonal vegetation emerges, and animals gather to graze on fresh growth. For human groups accustomed to following herds, such places provide critical opportunities. Archaeological evidence from the Yukon and Alaska shows hearths and tools at sites dated to around 15 to 20,000 years ago, suggesting that humans are present near the edges of these glaciers earlier than once assumed. The remains include stone blades, flakes, and points suited for hunting large mammals alongside bones of caribou and bison with cut marks. These finds indicate campsites where groups processed meat and hides, perhaps caching resources for later use. The presence of multiple hearths at some sites suggests repeated occupation, a sign that the edges of the glaciers served as seasonal refuges rather than mere transient stops. A well-established fact is that glacial margins produce environments rich in resources. Meltwater streams bring nutrients to valleys, encouraging grasses and shrubs to grow even in cold conditions. Animals are drawn to these zones, providing hunters with reliable access to game. Freshwater from melting ice supports fish runs, and the exposed ground along ice edges can yield roots and berries in summer. Humans take advantage of this concentration of life, establishing camps that allow them to exploit multiple resources in close proximity. A lesser-known detail lies in the use of natural shelters created by ice and rock. In some regions, glacier-carved valleys provide protection from wind, while moraines, ridges of rock and debris left by retreating ice, offer elevated ground for camps. Archaeologists have identified sites where stone tools are found alongside large boulders or cliff faces, suggesting that people placed their dwellings in positions shielded from storms. In a landscape where exposure can mean death, these choices reflect careful observation and adaptation. Yet mysteries remain about the precise nature of human life at these glacier edges. Did groups stay for entire seasons, or did they move frequently in response to shifting herds and weather? How large were these camps, and what social structures supported them? The fragmentary remains provide few answers. Organic materials such as wood and hide rarely survive in these contexts, leaving only stone bone and charcoal. Without full evidence, scholars debate the scale and permanence of human presence at the ice margins. Some propose long-term refuges, while others argue for brief stopovers during migrations. The uncertainty underscores the difficulty of reconstructing life from scattered traces. On the planetary scale, these glacial margins are part of a much larger dynamic system. The growth and retreat of ice sheets alter not only local landscapes, but global climate. When ice advances, it reflects sunlight, cooling the planet further. When it melts, it releases vast amounts of fresh water into oceans, shifting currents and weather patterns. These fluctuations create cycles of opportunity and challenge for humans at the edges. What seems like a local decision where to place a camp is in fact connected to processes operating across hemispheres. To appreciate the scale, consider that the Laurentide ice sheet alone covers an area larger than all of modern Europe, with thicknesses reaching up to 3 kilometers. For humans standing at its edge, the ice must have appeared as an endless wall, gleaming under the sun, rumbling as it cracked and moved. The decision to camp nearby required both caution and ingenuity, for avalanches, floods, and sudden shifts posed constant risks. Yet the rewards of game and fresh water made these zones vital. Archaeological traces provide glimpses of the technology used in these settings. Microblade tools hafted into bone or wood shafts serve as effective hunting weapons. Scrapers and awls process hides into clothing and shelter coverings. Bone needles, some delicately made, show the importance of sewing garments capable of withstanding extreme cold. Hearths constructed with stone circles suggest controlled fires, carefully maintained in areas where fuel is scarce. Driftwood carried by rivers and the bones of large animals serve as fuel, ensuring that fires burn long into glacial nights. Evidence also points to the use of mammoth bones in construction. At sites further west in Eurasia, entire dwellings are built from tusks and ribs covered with hides to form domed shelters. While direct examples in Alaska and Yukon are fewer, the principle likely carried over. In regions where trees are sparse, the bones of megafauna provide a critical resource for building and heating. The ingenuity of these adaptations reflects deep resilience in the face of environmental extremes. Genetic studies support the idea that populations lived in Beringia and its margins for extended periods, possibly thousands of years, before moving south into the Americas. This Beringian standstill hypothesis suggests that humans persisted in these environments through multiple generations, isolated by ice sheets to the south and distance to the west. In this time, their lineages diverged from related populations in Asia, forming the genetic foundation of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. The camps at glacial edges may thus represent not only temporary survival strategies, but the formative settings of ancestral communities. Daily life in these camps would have revolved around cycles of hunting, processing, and maintaining warmth. Hunters tracked caribou and bison across snow, returning with meat and hides. Women and men together worked hides into clothing, sinew into thread, and bone into tools. Fires were tended continuously, essential not only for cooking but for preventing frostbite in long winter nights. Children learned early to identify animal tracks, to distinguish safe ice from dangerous, and to understand the signs of weather. Each generation built upon the knowledge of the last, ensuring survival in a landscape shaped by ice. The sensory world of these camps would have been dominated by contrasts, the silence of snow broken only by cracking ice, the brilliance of sunlight reflecting from glaciers, the darkness of endless winter nights punctuated by firelight. The air would have carried the scent of smoke hides and meat drying on racks. The ground beneath shelters would have been hardened by frost, littered with flakes of stone and bone fragments. In such conditions, the routines of life became rituals of endurance, repeated across years and generations. As humans persist in these settings, the ice sheets themselves change. They retreat slowly, opening corridors that will one day allow passage into the Americas, then advance again, closing routes. Camps at the edges represent waiting adaptation and survival during times when movement southward is blocked. They are thresholds in both space and time, poised between continents and between epochs of glacial advance and retreat. In their quiet endurance, these camps hold the memory of patience on a planetary scale. The edge of the glaciers is thus both an ending and a beginning. It marks the limit of the known world for those who live there, yet it also stands at the threshold of a new one waiting to be entered when the ice recedes. From these camps, humans watch the changing ice, the herds that graze nearby, and the skies that signal seasons. They endure, adapt, and persist, holding place at the very boundary of possibility, until the land beyond the glaciers opens to them. As humans linger in Beringia, their story is recorded not only in stone and bone, but also in the hidden patterns of their DNA threads of ancestry that stretch across continents and millennia. Genetic research over the past decades has illuminated connections that archaeology alone could not fully reveal, showing how populations once spread, mixed, and diverged. Studies of both modern indigenous peoples of the Americas and ancient remains from Siberia and Alaska have traced the genetic origins of those who crossed the land bridge. The evidence shows that their lineages stem from populations of Northeast Asia, with roots that reach deeper into Central Eurasia. Some of their genes carry signals of Western Eurasian ancestry, suggesting that long before the crossing, populations mixed in the vast expanses of Siberia. By the time humans establish themselves in Beringia, they are already the product of long journeys and earlier encounters, carrying within them the legacies of people who lived thousands of kilometers away. One well-established fact in genetic research is the presence of what scholars call the Beringian standstill, a period during which ancestral populations remained isolated in Beringia for thousands of years before moving south into the Americas. This is inferred from the genetic diversity of indigenous peoples, which shows signs of a long separation from their Asian relatives, followed by expansion into the Americas. The standstill model helps explain how distinct genetic lineages formed lineages still traceable today in the genomes of first peoples across the continents. It suggests that the crossing was not a simple event, but a prolonged pause in which humans endured, adapted, and shaped their identity in the far north. A lesser-known detail emerges from the study of mitochondrial DNA passed through maternal lines. Some haplogroups found widely among indigenous peoples of the Americas are rare or absent in Asia today, but appear in ancient remains from Siberia. This indicates that certain genetic signatures survived only through the migration into the Americas, preserved in new environments, even as they disappeared from their places of origin. In this way, the Americas became a kind of genetic reservoir, carrying lineages that might otherwise have vanished. The genetics of ancient remains add further depth. At sites such as Yana RHS in Siberia, DNA recovered from the bones of children dating to 32,000 years ago reveals a mixture of ancestries including elements shared with both Europeans and East Asians. These ancient North Siberians represent a population that contributed to the ancestry of those who later spread into Beringia. Further East DNA from individuals in the Kolyma River region, dating to around 10,000 years ago, shows close affinity with the ancestors of Native Americans, supporting the idea that populations in Northeast Asia were the immediate source of those who entered the Americas. Yet mysteries remain, and genetics has not provided simple answers. One unresolved question is whether there were one or multiple waves of migration into the Americas. Some genetic models support a single founding population that later diversified, while others suggest the possibility of at least two distinct migrations. Certain linguistic and cultural differences among indigenous groups have been interpreted as echoes of these early divisions, but the genetic evidence is not conclusive. Another mystery lies in the presence of genetic signals from Australasian populations, sometimes called the Y signal, detected in some indigenous groups in South America. How such a signal reached so far from its source remains debated. It may represent ancient population structure within Asia before the migration into Beringia, or it may suggest contact that has yet to be fully understood. These puzzles remind us that even with the powerful tools of genomics, the pathways of human history remain complex and partly hidden. On the planetary scale, the story of these genetic threads illustrates how human populations are part of the broader dynamics of migration, isolation, and connection that shape all life. Just as species of plants and animals expand and contract their ranges with climate shifts, so too do humans. Genes flow across landscapes carried by movement and then become isolated when barriers such as ice sheets or oceans intervene. The cycles of glaciation and sea level change thus shape not only the land, but also the very composition of human ancestry. To grasp the scale of these genetic journeys, one can consider that lineages identified in modern indigenous peoples trace back tens of thousands of years, spanning distances greater than from London to Beijing. A mother in Beringia carries mitochondrial lineages that originated thousands of kilometers west, passed through generations over millennia, surviving through migrations, bottlenecks, and adaptations. These lineages then spread southward into the Americas, carried into deserts, mountains, and forests, where they endure to this day. Archaeology provides complementary evidence for these genetic insights. Sites in Siberia and Alaska show continuity in tool traditions, while new discoveries of ancient remains allow for direct genetic analysis. The remains of a young child buried at the Upward Sun River site in Alaska, dating to around 11,500 years ago, provide crucial data. The child's genome shows close relation to the founding population of the Americas, confirming that people living in Alaska at this time were part of the same lineage that spread across the continents. This discovery bridges the gap between Beringia and the Americas, showing continuity between populations on both sides of the former land bridge. Daily life in Beringia during the genetic standstill would have been shaped by familiar challenges. Families hunted caribou bison and mammoth fished in rivers and gathered plants in summer. Camps were established near water sources with shelters of hide and bone, offering protection against wind. Children grew up hearing stories, learning skills, and carrying the genetic inheritance of countless ancestors. They may not have known that their isolation was shaping the genetic future of entire continents, but the patterns of their marriages, births, and survival left indelible marks in DNA that remain visible tens of thousands of years later. The sensory world of Beringia during this time would have been one of contrast: brilliant skies over endless plains, the crack of ice, and the call of birds in brief summers, the howl of wolves across frozen valleys. In this world, genetics was lived experience, the choices of who survived, who bore children, and how communities endured the challenges of climate and scarcity. Each child born carried not just life, but the inheritance of a lineage stretching back across continents. As the centuries pass, the ice sheets to the south shift and retreat, opening pathways into new lands. Populations that once lingered in Beringia begin to move again, their genes carried with them into the Americas. The genetic threads that link Siberia to South America, that connect ancient remains to modern communities, are thus woven through this moment of transition. In the deep patterns of DNA, the crossing of continents is preserved, a record invisible to the people who lived it, but now clear in the light of science. The genetic threads across continents show that migration is more than movement through space. It is also continuity through time, the transmission of lineages across generations, the survival of ancestry through challenges that eliminate others. It is a reminder that the story of entering the Americas is written not only in landscapes and artifacts, but also in the living fabric of human beings. For centuries, perhaps millennia, Beringia itself becomes a refuge, a place where humans persist when the way south into the Americas is blocked by vast walls of ice. Genetic studies point to this long pause, a Beringian standstill, in which small populations live in isolation, cut off from their Asian relatives by distance and cut off from the Americas by glaciers. This prolonged stay turns Beringia from a mere corridor into a homeland, one where generations are born, grow and die, leaving traces of their lives in scattered camps and in the genetic legacy of their descendants. The landscape that shelters them is expansive and varied. Though the climate is cold, Beringia is not a frozen wasteland. Its low-lying plains and river valleys support steppe tundra vegetation, rich in grasses, sedges, and herbs that attract grazing herds. Caribou migrate through these regions, followed by hunters who know their patterns. Mammoths, bison, and horses roam widely, providing meat, hides, and bone for tools and fuel. In summer, berries and roots add variety to diets otherwise dominated by game. Along the coasts, marine mammals and fish are available, supplementing terrestrial resources. Archaeological traces in both Siberia and Alaska confirm the presence of humans who adapted to these diverse niches, building lives that depended on flexibility and resilience. A well-established fact about this refuge is that Beringia remained largely unglaciated during the height of the Ice Age, even as vast ice sheets covered much of North America. While the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets sealed off the route south, Beringia itself remained habitable, a patchwork of plains, rivers, and uplands. Pollen cores from ancient lakes show evidence of shrubs such as willow and birch, while animal remains confirm thriving herds. This unglaciated pocket provided space for people to endure even as surrounding regions grew more hostile. The survival of humans here is one of the reasons why migration into the Americas later became possible. A lesser-known detail is that Beringia was not only a biological refuge, but also a cultural one. Sites such as Yana in Siberia reveal ornaments made of ivory and beads of bone signs that even in severe climates, symbolic traditions endured. Such artifacts suggest that identity, social bonds, and perhaps ritual life continued in the standstill, shaping the cultural legacy carried forward into the Americas. These expressions remind us that survival was not only about food and shelter, but also about maintaining meaning and belonging in uncertain times. Yet mysteries surround the Beringian refuge. How many people lived here, and how long did they remain? Estimates vary widely from a few thousand to tens of thousands of years. Did they live in large interconnected groups or in small, scattered bands with limited contact? Archaeological evidence is sparse, and many sites are now submerged beneath the waters of the Bering Strait. Without access to those hidden landscapes, scholars must piece together the story from fragments, leaving much uncertain. The possibility that entire ways of life are now lost beneath the sea adds to the sense of mystery surrounding this standstill. On the planetary scale, the idea of Beringia as a refuge highlights how glacial cycles create not only barriers, but also havens. Just as animals find survival in refugia where climate remains stable, so too do humans. Beringia is one of several such regions worldwide during the Ice Age, alongside southern Europe, parts of East Asia, and refuges in Africa. These pockets of stability serve as cradles of survival from which populations later expand as climates shift. In this way, the standstill in Beringia fits into a global pattern of contraction and expansion driven by planetary rhythms of ice and warmth. To understand the scale of life in this refuge, imagine a community numbering only a few hundred individuals spread across a territory as large as modern France. Distances between camps may be measured in days or weeks of walking, and contact between groups may be rare, occurring only when hunting routes overlap or when rivers draw families together. In such isolation, genetic drift takes place, shaping lineages in ways that will define the populations of the Americas. Each birth, each survival through winter, carries significance far beyond the awareness of those who lived it, as their descendants will one day populate entire continents. The archaeological record provides glimpses of their resilience. Hearths filled with charcoal testify to fires tended through long nights. Stone flakes scattered around campsites reveal tool-making, the production of blades and scrapers for butchering game. Bones bearing cut marks confirm subsistence strategies that relied on large animals. In some places, caches of tools or tusks suggest planning for future use, evidence of foresight in unpredictable conditions. Each artifact, however small, represents the continuity of life in this refuge. Genetics deepens the story. Analyses of indigenous peoples across the Americas show that their ancestry traces back to populations who remained isolated for thousands of years. This standstill is visible in the patterns of mitochondrial DNA and in the variation of other genetic markers. The data indicate a bottleneck, a reduction in population size that limited genetic diversity but preserved distinct lineages. This event, though invisible to those who lived, it shaped the biological foundation of entire continents. The refuge in Beringia was thus not only a place of survival, but a crucible of identity. Daily life in this standstill must have been both harsh and ordinary. Families rose each morning to tend fires, mend clothing, and prepare for hunting. Hunters set out across snowfields, tracking caribou or mammoth, returning with meat to be shared. Women gathered plants in summer-dried fish and prepared hides. Children played at imitating hunters, learning the skills they would one day need. Elders recalled past winters, teaching knowledge of routes and seasons. Through repetition and memory, life continued season after season, year after year. The sensory world of this refuge was marked by contrasts, silence broken by wind, endless horizons of snow and tundra, bursts of green in summer meadows, the movement of herds across plains. Fires glowed within skin tents or shelters made of bone and hide. The smell of smoke, the taste of dried meat, the sound of tools striking stone, all became the rhythm of life in Beringia. These experiences, though ordinary to those who lived them, carried forward across generations, preserved in memory and practice. As centuries pass, the ice sheets to the south begin to retreat slowly, opening corridors that will eventually allow migration into the Americas. For the people of Beringia, these changes are gradual, measured in the lifetimes of generations. They may not have recognized the significance of each retreating glacier or each new valley opening, but the opportunities they created would one day transform human history. For now, Beringia remains their home, a refuge sustained by resilience and adaptation. The story of this standstill, preserved in genetics archaeology and climate science, shows that human migration is not always movement. Sometimes it is waiting, enduring, and persisting in place until the world itself shifts. In that stillness lies the foundation for what follows the eventual spread of humans into every corner of the Americas. As the Ice Age slowly begins to wane, the vast sheets of ice that cover North America shift in size and position, alternately blocking and revealing potential pathways southward. For the people waiting in Beringia, these changes determine when and how movement into the Americas becomes possible. The Laurentide Ice Sheet. Stretching over much of Canada and the Cordilleran Ice Sheet, draped across the western mountains, form an immense barrier that prevents direct access to the lands beyond. For thousands of years, they merge, sealing off central corridors, while to the west, steep glaciers meet the Pacific coast, cutting off another possible route. Yet, as climates gradually warm, ice begins to retreat, and new windows of passage open for the first time in millennia. Geological studies have traced the outlines of these shifting corridors, showing that by about 14,000 years ago, openings existed that may have allowed humans to move through or around the ice. One well-established fact is the development of what is known as the ice-free corridor, a stretch of land that eventually emerged between the receding Laurentide and Cordilleran sheets. Once fully open, this corridor connected Beringia to the interior of North America, leading southward toward the Great Plains. Evidence from lake sediments and ancient DNA of plants and animals shows that by around 13,000 years ago, this corridor supported life grasses, bison, and other resources that humans could use. For some researchers, this pathway represents the main route by which people first entered the Americas. Yet the timing is crucial, and debates continue about whether the corridor was open early enough to account for the earliest archaeological sites found far to the south. A lesser-known detail lies in the evidence from ancient plant and animal DNA preserved in the sediments of former glacial lakes. Studies from the region of Alberta reveal that as soon as the ice retreated, life returned quickly, with willows, sagebrush, and bison appearing within centuries. This rapid recolonization suggests that when humans did pass through, they would not have crossed an empty wasteland, but rather a newly revived landscape capable of sustaining travelers. It shows how resilient ecosystems are in the wake of glacial retreat and how closely human opportunities depended on these natural recoveries. Yet many mysteries remain. One of the greatest is whether the first people to reach the Americas actually used the inland corridor or instead traveled along the Pacific coast. Archaeological sites such as Monte Verde in Chile, dating to at least 14,500 years ago, appear too early to be explained by the inland route alone, leading some scholars to argue that a coastal passage must have been used. This hypothetical coastal route would have taken humans along the Pacific shoreline of Beringia and down the edge of the continent, perhaps using boats or rafts and exploiting rich marine ecosystems. However, much of the evidence for such travel lies beneath today's seas, as coastlines during the Ice Age extended far beyond their present limits. Without access to these submerged sites, direct proof remains elusive, leaving the question open. On the planetary scale, these shifting windows of passage reflect the interconnectedness of climate, ice, and sea. As glaciers shrink, seas rise, flooding coastal plains around the world. At the same time, the release of meltwater alters ocean circulation, changing weather patterns across hemispheres. The retreat of ice in North America is thus not an isolated event, but part of a global transformation, one that reshapes ecosystems and human possibilities from Europe to Asia to the Americas. In this context, the opening of corridors through or around the ice is just one aspect of a worldwide reordering of landscapes at the end of the Pleistocene. To appreciate the scale of these changes, one might picture the ice sheets themselves, vast expanses stretching farther than from Madrid to Moscow, towering more than 2 kilometers thick in places. The corridors that open between them are narrow by comparison, yet still hundreds of kilometers long. For humans on the ground, moving through such passages would have been a daunting task, requiring not only physical endurance, but also the ability to locate food, water, and shelter along the way. Each window of passage was not simply a path, but an environment that demanded adaptation. Archaeological evidence from Alaska and the Yukon suggests that humans were present and prepared when these opportunities arose. Tools from this period include finely made bifacial points, scrapers, and microblades, all suited for hunting and processing game. Hearths show that people gathered fuel in regions with limited wood, relying on driftwood shrubs or bone. Animal remains indicate hunting of caribou and bison species that would also have used the new corridors. These traces suggest that when the ice finally receded, humans were ready to take advantage of the openings, moving quickly into lands that had been inaccessible for thousands of years. Genetic studies support the view that once corridors opened, populations expanded rapidly into new territories. Patterns of diversity among indigenous peoples indicate a swift spread southward, consistent with the idea that once the barrier fell, movement into the Americas accelerated. Within a few millennia, humans were present from Alaska to the tip of South America, an extraordinary dispersal made possible by the windows of passage created by melting ice. Yet the precise routes remain debated, with some lineages suggesting coastal movement and others supporting inland travel. It is possible that both routes were used at different times or by different groups, contributing to the complexity of the peopling of the Americas. Daily life for those who waited at the edges of ice must have involved constant watchfulness. Families observed the land carefully, noting changes in rivers, plants, and animal migrations that might signal new possibilities. Hunters ranged farther, testing paths into valleys where ice once stood. Elders recalled earlier seasons, comparing them to the present, recognizing subtle shifts in the environment. When openings finally appeared, movement south would not have been a reckless leap into the unknown, but a measured extension of practices already in place. Hunting, gathering, camping carried into new lands. The sensory experience of entering a corridor between ice sheets must have been both awe-inspiring and intimidating. Towering walls of ice flanked narrow valleys dripping with meltwater that carved channels and lakes. The air would have been colder, damper, echoing with the sounds of cracking ice. Yet grasses and shrubs grew where bare ground emerged, and animals grazed, creating pockets of abundance in the midst of glacial landscapes. Fires burned at night in camps along riverbanks, smoke rising against the pale glow of northern skies. These journeys were shaped by both challenge and promise, demanding resilience but offering new horizons. In the long view, the opening of windows of passage marks a turning point in human history. For millennia, people endured in Beringia, isolated by ice, waiting for the world to change. When it did, they seized the opportunity, entering a continent that had never before known humans. The timing of that entry, whether by inland corridor or coastal route, remains debated, but the significance is beyond doubt. These windows transformed the geography of possibility, allowing a small population to spread into lands that would become their home for tens of thousands of years. The story of windows of passage reminds us that human migration is often less about decisive action than about patience, endurance, and readiness. For those who lived in Beringia, the future depended on watching the ice, enduring the long wait, and moving when the world allowed. In that moment of opening the path into the Americas began. While the inland corridor between the ice sheets has long been considered a potential route into the Americas, increasing evidence suggests that some of the first migrations may have taken place along the Pacific coast, a path shaped by ocean shoreline and the rich ecosystems of kelp forests. During the height of the Ice Age, when sea levels fell by more than 100 meters, the coastline extended far beyond its present position, revealing plains, beaches, and headlands now buried beneath the Pacific. These lands would have provided opportunities for humans with the knowledge to exploit marine resources, offering a route south that bypassed the impassable glaciers of the interior. The coastal hypothesis has gained support from both archaeology and paleoecology, though much remains uncertain. A well-established fact is that kelp forest ecosystems thrive along the Pacific Rim, stretching from Japan to Alaska to the shores of South America. These environments provide dense concentrations of edible resources, fish, shellfish, sea mammals, seaweed, and birds that could have sustained small groups of travelers moving gradually southward. The idea of a kelp highway describes this continuous band of productivity, which may have functioned as a natural guide for human dispersal. Unlike the interior corridors, which opened late, this coastal route may have been available earlier, aligning with some of the earliest archaeological sites found deep in the Americas. A lesser-known detail comes from discoveries on islands off the Pacific coast of North America. On Calvert Island in British Columbia, human footprints dating to around 13,000 years ago were found preserved in shoreline sediments. These prints, belonging to at least 2 or 3 individuals, demonstrate that humans were present on the coast at the end of the Ice Age, leaving their marks along beaches that have since shifted. Such direct evidence of coastal presence is rare, but it supports the idea that humans did indeed move along the shoreline. Other sites, including caves on islands in southeastern Alaska, have yielded stone tools and animal remains, suggesting early use of marine resources. Each discovery adds to a growing picture of coastal life, even if the majority of sites remain hidden beneath rising seas. Mysteries, however, still surround the coastal route. One enduring question is whether humans possessed the maritime technology to travel along such coasts during the Ice Age. While direct evidence of boats from this period is absent, indirect signs suggest the capacity existed. Humans had already reached Australia more than 40,000 years earlier, requiring significant sea crossings, and island hopping had taken place in Southeast Asia. These precedents indicate that people moving along the Pacific may have used simple watercraft rafts, dugouts, or skin boats to navigate bays, rivers, and short sea passages. Yet without preserved remains, this aspect of the migration remains speculative. Another unresolved issue is the timing. Some sites in the Americas, such as Monte Verde in southern Chile, date to at least 14,500 years ago, implying that people reached South America much earlier than the inland corridor would have allowed. If these dates hold, then the coastal route becomes the most plausible explanation. But direct coastal evidence from the far north is scarce, leaving a gap between theory and proof. On the planetary scale, the coastal hypothesis illustrates how lowered sea levels reshaped not only Beringia, but shorelines across the globe. As ice sheets locked away water, continental shelves emerged, adding thousands of square kilometers of habitable land along coasts. For humans, these coastal plains provided pathways rich in food and opportunity, linking distant regions in new ways. When the ice melted and seas rose again, much of this world vanished beneath waves, leaving only fragments of evidence preserved in rare locations. The Pacific route thus exemplifies the fragile nature of archaeological records shaped by forces operating on a planetary scale. To grasp the scale of such a journey, imagine following the coastline from Alaska to Chile, a distance greater than from Lisbon to Cape Town. Moving by small increments, families might travel only a few kilometers in a season, establishing camps in sheltered bays, harvesting shellfish, fishing rivers, and hunting sea mammals. Over generations, these movements would accumulate, spreading populations across thousands of kilometers. For those who lived it, the journey may have felt like seasonal life repeated in new places. But from the perspective of deep time, it was a continental migration. Archaeological finds from further south reinforce this vision. At Monte Verde in Chile, remains of wooden structures, stone tools, and preserved plant materials suggest a community adapted to a wide range of resources. Seaweed found at the site demonstrates the use of coastal resources consistent with the idea that migrants followed shorelines. Other early sites in North and South America similarly indicate adaptation to diverse environments, but their early dates remain difficult to reconcile without a coastal passage. The Pacific route may thus explain how humans reached such distant regions so quickly. Daily life along the coast would have differed from the steppe tundra of the interior. Camps would be built near tidal flats, rivers, or lagoons with fires fueled by driftwood abundant along beaches. Families gathered shellfish, dried fish for storage, and hunted seals or some sea lions when possible. Tools included not only stone blades, but also bone harpoons and fishing implements, though organic artifacts rarely survive. children learned the rhythms of tides, the signs of weather on the sea, and the migration of salmon. The coast offered both danger and abundance, demanding new forms of knowledge that built upon older traditions. The sensory world of this migration would have been filled with salt air, the cries of seabirds, and the crash of waves against rocky shores. At night, fires flickered against the sound of the ocean, and stars guided travelers along their way. Unlike the silence of the mammoth steppe, the coastal path carried constant movement of water tides and life. For humans traveling south, each new bay or headland opened possibilities, and each camp marked progress in a journey that spanned generations. Genetics provide support for this possibility. Analyses of indigenous populations show rapid dispersal across the Americas, consistent with a coastal spread. Some lineages appear deep in South America very early, suggesting swift movement. While genetics cannot specify routes, the speed implied by these patterns matches what a shoreline migration would allow, where resources and pathways are continuous. The coastal hypothesis thus aligns genetic, archaeological, and environmental evidence even as uncertainties remain. In the long view, the Pacific coastal route represents one of the most remarkable possibilities in human prehistory, that people moved along the edge of continents sustained by the sea and entered new worlds long before inland routes were viable. It demonstrates the adaptability of humans capable of surviving in tundra, forest, and coast, alike carrying knowledge across environments that differ profoundly. Whether they walked beaches, paddled across estuaries, or fished kelp forests, their persistence opened the path into the Americas. The Pacific coast, now submerged and altered, may hold countless undiscovered sites, silent witnesses to this great migration. As seas rose at the end of the Ice Age, many of these camps vanished beneath waves, leaving gaps that science can only partly fill. Yet the outlines of the story remain clear. Humans reached the Americas earlier than the inland corridor would allow, and the coast provided a path rich enough to make it possible. The Pacific coastal route thus stands as both mystery and explanation, a reminder that the first steps into new worlds were often taken not across plains alone, but along the shifting margins of sea and land. As the world begins to warm and the glaciers retreat, humans who have endured for millennia in Beringia finally cross into the lands of the Americas. Whether they travel through the interior ice-free corridor as it opens, or along the Pacific coast, where kelp forests provide continuity of resources, the result is the same. The first steps southward mark the beginning of a vast expansion into a continent untouched by humans until this moment. The journey is gradual, measured in generations, but it is decisive. For once the barrier of ice is overcome, entire new landscapes stretch open, forests, plains, mountains, and rivers without end. Archaeological evidence supports this transition. Sites such as Buttermilk Creek in Texas, Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania, and Monteverde in Chile all suggest human presence earlier than once believed, challenging older models that placed the first arrivals much later. At Buttermilk Creek, thousands of stone artifacts dating to around 15,500 years ago have been uncovered, showing traditions older than the well-known Clovis culture. At Meadowcroft, layers of occupation dating to perhaps 16,000 years ago suggest long use of a sheltered site. And at Monteverde, preserved wooden structures and plant remains show a community thriving at least 14,500 years ago in South America, far from the glacial edges. These sites, spread across the hemisphere, show that once humans began moving southward, they dispersed with extraordinary speed. A well-established fact from archaeology is that Clovis Point's large fluted stone spear tips appear across much of North America by about 13,000 years ago. Their widespread presence suggests rapid cultural transmission and possibly population growth. Yet these points are not the earliest evidence of humans in the Americas, and they may represent an innovation of groups already well established. The appearance of Clovis thus reflects adaptation to new environments rather than the initial entry itself. The story of first crossing southward is therefore older and more complex than once thought, shaped by varied traditions and routes. A lesser-known detail comes from the discovery of mastodon bones in Washington state, with clear-cut marks dating to around 13,800 years ago. These remains show butchery of a giant animal, long before the dominance of Clovis culture, indicating that humans hunted or scavenged megafauna soon after their arrival. Similar finds in Florida, where butchered mammoth bones date to 14th to 500 years ago, reinforce this pattern. Such discoveries expand the picture of early subsistence, showing that humans engaged with the great animals of the Pleistocene almost immediately upon entering the continent. Yet, mysteries endure. How quickly did humans move south once the first pathways opened? The presence of sites thousands of kilometers apart within a narrow time frame suggests rapid dispersal, but the mechanisms remain uncertain. Did groups travel swiftly along rivers and coasts, leapfrogging across landscapes, or did small communities spread gradually, filling territory as populations grew? The genetic evidence supports both speed and diversity, indicating a founding population that expanded rapidly but also diversified in isolation. The unanswered questions remind us that the crossing southward is a process, not a single event, one still partly hidden in the gaps of the record. On the planetary scale, the movement into the Americas represents the final stage of human expansion across the globe. By this time, humans have already spread across Africa, Eurasia, and Australia. The crossing of Beringia and the move into the Americas complete the occupation of all major continents, linking humanity into a truly global presence. The migration is thus part of a larger pattern in which climatic shifts and sea level change open new possibilities, and humans seize them, extending their range farther than any species before. To grasp the scale of the first southward crossing, one might imagine a family moving from Alaska into the heart of North America. Within only a few generations, their descendants could be living thousands of kilometers away, following rivers that flow into new valleys, hunting game they had never seen, and gathering plants unfamiliar to their ancestors. The distance from Alaska to Chile is greater than from London to Cape Town. Yet, archaeological sites show that humans occupied both ends of this span within a few thousand years. For a species moving on foot, carrying children, and surviving in small groups, this dispersal is extraordinary. Archaeological sites along the way preserve glimpses of this expansion. In caves and rock shelters, hearths mark places of warmth and cooking. Stone flakes lie scattered where tools were shaped. Bones with cut marks show butchery of bison, mammoth, and ground sloth. In coastal sites, shell middens accumulate the remains of repeated harvests. Each fragment testifies to movement, settlement, and adaptation, building a mosaic of life across the continent. Tools themselves tell of innovation. Spear points evolve into varied forms suited for different prey. Scrapers, awls, and bone needles reveal the importance of clothing and hides. Grinding stones suggest processing of seeds and plants, evidence that diets expand beyond meat. These technological shifts show that humans did not simply move south, but actively adapted to the environments they encountered, altering strategies as needed. Genetic evidence adds depth, indicating that populations spread rapidly, but also diverged as they moved. Distinct lineages appear in South America that reflect early separation from northern groups, consistent with fast initial dispersal, followed by long periods of regional development. The genetic legacy of those first migrants remains visible in indigenous peoples today, carrying markers that trace back to the moment of crossing southward. Daily life for the first people in the Americas must have been filled with both familiarity and novelty. Hunters still followed herds, but now those herds included new species, giant ground sloths, camelids, and saber-toothed cats. Rivers provided fish, unknown in Beringia. Forests offered new fruits and nuts, and landscapes shifted from tundra to grassland to woodland within the span of a few hundred kilometers. Families established camps in caves along riverbanks or in open plains, adjusting dwellings to local conditions. The skills developed in Beringia remained vital, but each new setting demanded innovation. The sensory world of the first crossing southward would have been full of contrasts: the crack of ice, replaced by the rustle of leaves, the sight of vast prairies stretching under summer skies, the roar of waterfalls in valleys carved by glacial melt. Fires burned in places no human had ever set them before. The cries of animals unfamiliar to human ears echoed across the land. For those who lived it, this was not a grand migration, but daily life unfolding in new directions. Yet in hindsight, it was one of the great expansions of human history. The significance of this first crossing southward lies not only in its scale, but also in its permanence. Once humans entered the Americas, they did not leave. Populations grew spread and diversified, filling landscapes from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest. The crossing marked the beginning of a new chapter in human prehistory, one that would lead to thousands of cultures, languages, and traditions, all rooted in the endurance of those who first stepped beyond the glaciers. The crossing southward is thus both an end and a beginning, the culmination of wading in Beringia and the start of human presence in the Americas. It embodies the patience of those who endured isolation, the resilience of those who seized opportunity, and the adaptability of a species capable of inhabiting every environment the planet offered. In the quiet persistence of those first families lies the foundation for a continental story that will unfold for millennia. The evidence for the first human presence in the Americas is written in fragments of stone and bone scattered across landscapes that have changed dramatically since those early times. Archaeology has long relied on such fragments to reconstruct the story of entry and expansion, and each discovery adds a piece to the mosaic, even as many questions remain unanswered. The earliest tools found in North and South America suggest a complex and varied pattern of technology adapted to diverse environments and evolving quickly after the first arrival. For much of the 20th century, the Clovis culture with its distinctive fluted stone points was considered the earliest evidence of humans in the Americas. These points, long and finely worked, were used as spear tips and are found across much of North America, dating to around 13,000 years ago. Their wide distribution once suggested that Clovis people represented the first wave of migrants rapidly spreading and hunting megafauna across the continent. But more recent discoveries have pushed human presence further back, showing that people were already here before Clovis, leaving behind other traditions of stone tools and traces of occupation. Sites like Monteverde in Chile, dating to at least 14,500 years ago, provide clear evidence of wooden structures, plant remains, and stone tools. The preservation of seaweed and other perishable materials there demonstrates that these early groups used diverse resources, not only large animals. In North America, the Buttermilk Creek site in Texas has yielded thousands of artifacts dating to around 15,500 years ago, while the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania has layers of occupation possibly stretching back even further. These sites show that Clovis was not the beginning, but rather a later development in a much deeper story. A well-established fact is that stone technology in the Americas was highly diverse. Alongside Clovis points, there are stemmed points in the Pacific Northwest leaf-shaped tools in South America, and distinctive regional traditions that suggest independent development. This diversity shows that early migrants were not a single cultural group, but multiple communities adapting to local conditions. The tools they left behind are the clearest evidence of their presence, as stone endures when wood, hide, and fiber decay. A lesser-known detail comes from bone tools found at some of the earliest sites. At Monteverde, digging sticks and wooden planks have survived, revealing technologies that rarely leave traces. At other sites, bone points show that people fashioned hunting weapons from the remains of animals using every available resource. These organic tools hint at a broader material culture largely invisible to archaeology. They remind us that the stone artifacts we find are only one part of a much larger technological world that included wood fiber and bone, now mostly lost to time. Yet mysteries remain, especially concerning the gaps in the record. Why are some regions rich in early sites while others appear empty? Is this due to real absence of people or simply preservation bias? Many early camps were likely established along coasts or rivers that are now submerged beneath rising seas or buried under layers of sediment. The true extent of early human presence may be far greater than what is currently visible. Another unresolved question is the relationship between pre-Clovis and Clovis groups. Did Clovis technology spread among populations already present, or did new migrants introduce it? The genetic evidence points to a single founding population for most indigenous peoples of the Americas, suggesting continuity rather than replacement. But the cultural changes visible in stone tools remain difficult to explain, leaving scholars debating how traditions spread and transformed. On the planetary scale, the traces in stone and bone are part of a wider record of human migration across continents. Similar sequences of technological change are seen in Africa, Europe, and Asia, where distinct tool traditions mark different phases of expansion and adaptation. In every region, stone tools serve as the most enduring record outlasting organic remains. The Americas fit into this larger pattern, showing how human ingenuity leaves behind a durable signature even when all else has vanished. To grasp the scale of these traces, one can consider that a single stone flake struck from a core by a skilled hand might survive for 15,000 years, lying buried in soil until unearthed by archaeologists. Each flake represents a moment of decision, choosing how to shape a blade, how to prepare a core, how to use a tool. Multiplied across generations and continents, these small actions accumulate into the record of humanity itself. Sites across the Americas illustrate this vividly. At Page Ladson in Florida, stone tools were found alongside mastodon remains, showing butchery dating to around 14,500 years ago. At Cactus Hill in Virginia, stone points below Clovis layers suggest earlier occupations. At Pedra Ferrada in Brazil, thousands of stone fragments hint at possible human presence even earlier, though their interpretation is debated. Each site adds complexity to the timeline, showing that human arrival and dispersal were not simple or uniform. Daily life for those who left these traces must have been filled with routine tasks that now form the basis of archaeological discovery. Hunters crafted spear points and replaced broken tips. Hides were scraped with stone tools, bones split for marrow plants, cut and prepared. Fires were built, leaving charcoal that endures in soil. Camps were abandoned tools left behind, bones discarded. These ordinary acts, repeated countless times, created the archaeological record we now rely on. The sensory world of these early camps would have been marked by the sound of stone striking stone, the crackle of fire, the smell of meat roasting, the murmur of conversation. Children watched as elders shaped tools, learning the techniques by repetition. Hunters tested points for balance and sharpness. These moments, unremarkable at the time, became the enduring legacy of the first Americans. In examining these traces, scholars seek patterns that can reveal more than individual moments. The distribution of tool types, the arrangement of hearths, the association of bones and artifacts all provide clues to movement, subsistence, and culture. By comparing sites across vast distances, researchers reconstruct the spread of humans and the diversity of their adaptations. The work is painstaking and the record is incomplete, but the accumulation of evidence gradually reveals a story of persistence and ingenuity. In the long view, the traces in stone and bone are fragments of a much larger tapestry, one that connects Beringia to Patagonia ice, to rainforest, and generations of people to the landscapes they inhabited. They show that humans were not passive wanderers, but active agents shaping tools, hunting animals, and building lives in new worlds. The artifacts they left behind are small in scale, but immense in significance, marking the presence of people in lands where none had lived before. The story of first Americans is written in these traces, a record that endures long after the voices and lives themselves have vanished. The crossing into the Americas thus becomes visible not as a single moment, but as countless acts recorded in stone flakes, bone fragments, and hearths of ash. Each is a point of contact between people and landscape, between survival and memory. Together they form the evidence of one of the greatest expansions in human history. A story carried not in words, but in the silent endurance of stone and bone. As humans spread southward into the Americas, they enter landscapes teeming with animals they have never seen before, creatures that have evolved in isolation for millions of years. These encounters are among the most extraordinary in human prehistory, for the Americas are home to a diversity of megafauna rivaling that of Ice Age Eurasia and Africa. The first migrants familiar with mammoths, bison, and reindeer in Beringia now face giant ground sloths that tower over them. Saber-toothed cats with curved fangs, herds of camels and horses native to North America, massive armored glyptodons, and flightless birds larger than any alive today. Each new species presents both opportunity and danger, and the strategies humans develop to hunt, avoid, or coexist with these animals become central to survival. Fossil evidence across the continent confirms this richness. Mammoth and mastodon remains are found from Alaska to Florida, often associated with human tools or cut marks. Ground sloth bones have been uncovered in caves in the southern United States and South America, some with signs of butchery. The saber-toothed cat, Smilodon fatalis left, remains in the La Brea tar pits of California, alongside dire wolves and other predators. Horses and camels, once abundant, grazed in herds across the plains. This faunal assemblage reflects the unique evolutionary history of the Americas, shaped by isolation after the continent split from Eurasia. For humans entering this world, every hunt and every encounter involved trial and adaptation. A well-established fact from archaeology is that humans did interact with and hunt some of these large animals soon after their arrival. The site at Page Ladson in Florida preserves mastodon bones with cut marks dating to around 14 to 500 years ago. Other sites across the continent show similar associations of stone tools with megafaunal remains. These finds demonstrate that humans quickly added these unfamiliar species to their diets, applying skills honed in Eurasia to new prey. But hunting such massive animals required cooperation planning, and risk and success was never guaranteed. A lesser-known detail emerges from caves in South America where ground sloth bones bear evidence of human activity. In some cases, sloths may have been trapped or ambushed using natural enclosures to gain advantage. The meat, hide, and bones of such creatures would have provided valuable resources, but the danger posed by animals weighing several tons cannot be underestimated. These encounters reflect the ingenuity and courage of the first Americans who learned to confront challenges unlike any their ancestors had faced. Yet mysteries surround the role of humans in the fate of these animals. By about 10,000 years ago, most of the megafauna of the Americas were extinct. Mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, ground sloths, camels, horses, and many others vanished in a relatively short span of time. Scholars debate whether human hunting played a decisive role, whether climate change at the end of the Ice Age drove the extinctions, or whether the two forces combined. The overkill hypothesis argues that even small human populations armed with effective tools could have driven species to extinction, especially in regions where animals had never before encountered humans. Others emphasize the rapid warming and ecological shifts of the period as primary drivers. The truth may lie in both, but the precise balance remains unresolved, leaving this one of the great scientific mysteries of prehistory. On the planetary scale, the extinction of megafauna in the Americas mirrors similar patterns elsewhere. In Australia, giant marsupials disappeared soon after human arrival, while in Eurasia and Africa populations of mammoths, rhinos, and other large animals declined during the same period. The expansion of humans into new continents appears repeatedly associated with faunal change, reflecting the immense ecological impact of a species that is both predator and competitor. The Americas thus fit into a global story of human-driven transformations, part of the larger shift in ecosystems at the end of the Pleistocene. To grasp the scale of these faunal encounters, one can imagine a group of hunters on the plains of North America confronting a herd of mammoth animals, larger than elephants, moving in coordinated groups. The distance from one horizon to another is filled with the silhouettes of massive creatures, their tusks gleaming in the low sun. Nearby, camels and horses graze in numbers unfamiliar to Eurasian hunters, while predators stalk along the edges. Each decision whether to hunt, to wait, or to move on carries consequences for survival. The archaeological record preserves glimpses of such moments. At sites across North America, Clovis points have been found embedded in mammoth bones, direct evidence of hunts. At Taima in Venezuela, a mastodon kill site reveals spears and tools used to butcher the carcass. In South America, cut marks on giant sloth bones indicate processing of meat and hide. Each find confirms that humans engaged directly with the great animals of the Americas, leaving behind traces of encounters that shaped both human and animal histories. Daily life in this environment must have been marked by constant awareness of animals, both prey and predator. Hunters tracked herds by their prints, learning their habits and migration routes. Families prepared hides for clothing and shelters using bones for tools and ornaments. Fires were kept burning at night to ward off predators. Children grew up hearing the calls of strange animals, learning to recognize the dangers of saber-toothed cats or the opportunities offered by herds of camels. Every element of subsistence was tied to the animals that shared the land. The sensory world of these encounters would have been overwhelming. The trumpeting of mammoths echoed across valleys, the ground shaking under their steps. The musky scent of herds carried on the wind, guiding hunters to their location. The roars of predators cut through the night, a reminder that humans were not the only hunters here. The crack of stone points striking bone, the smell of blood and smoke at kill sites. The sound of hides being scraped, these formed the texture of life in a world filled with giants. Genetic and isotopic studies add further insight, showing what these animals ate and how they moved. Analysis of mammoth tusks reveals growth rings that record seasons and migrations, echoing the lives of the animals humans pursued. Studies of ancient dung deposits show the plants consumed by ground sloths and other herbivores, painting a picture of ecosystems now lost. Through such data, the world of faunal encounters becomes clearer, even as much remains unknown. In the long view, these encounters mark both a pinnacle of human adaptability and the beginning of profound change. For the first Americans, the abundance of large animals offered opportunity unmatched in other parts of the world. But within a few thousand years, that abundance was gone, leaving humans to adapt once again to new realities. The extinction of the megafauna reshaped ecosystems, altered diets, and perhaps spurred innovations in tools and subsistence. The legacy of those first encounters is thus both richness and loss, a reminder of the fragile balance between humans and the animals they depend on. The great faunal encounters stand as one of the defining experiences of the peopling of the Americas. They show humans entering a world of giants, testing their skills against new challenges, and leaving marks visible in bones, tools, and sediments. They also highlight the profound impact of human presence, contributing to transformations that altered entire ecosystems. In these encounters lies both the wonder of discovery and the weight of consequence threads interwoven in the deep history of humanity's final continental frontier. Though Beringia itself has long vanished beneath the waters of the Bering Strait, its legacy endures in the genetics, languages, and archaeological traditions of the peoples who crossed it. The bridge that once linked continents no longer exists in physical form, yet its memory is inscribed in the human body and in cultural continuities that reach across the Americas. For tens of thousands of years, Beringia was more than a pathway. It was a homeland, a place where humans survived isolation and adapted to harsh conditions. When seas rose and the land was lost, what remained were the echoes carried forward in descendants preserved in ways that science only now begins to uncover. A well-established fact is that genetic studies of indigenous peoples across the Americas consistently trace their ancestry to a founding population that lived in Beringia during the last glacial maximum. The patterns of mitochondrial DNA and nuclear genomes show evidence of a prolonged standstill, confirming that for thousands of years humans remained in the north before dispersing southward. These lineages are still present today, shared among communities from the Arctic to Patagonia. The persistence of these genetic markers serves as one of the most enduring echoes of Beringia, a biological memory that outlasts landscapes. A lesser-known detail is the way Beringian influence appears in linguistic studies. Though indigenous languages of the Americas are extraordinarily diverse, some features suggest deep connections that may reflect common ancestry. Certain phonetic patterns and structural traits, though debated, are proposed to originate from the small founding population that once lived in Beringia. The diversity of languages today, numbering in the hundreds, emerged over millennia, but their ultimate roots lie in the people who endured the standstill. Even if the details remain uncertain, the possibility that languages carry echoes of Beringia adds another layer of continuity across time. Yet many mysteries surround the story. One unresolved question is whether there were multiple waves of migration into the Americas, each leaving distinct genetic and cultural traces. Some genetic evidence suggests that later groups from Northeast Asia may have contributed to populations in the Arctic, while others argue for a single major founding population. The archaeological record is sparse and inconclusive, leaving open the possibility of complexity beyond a single crossing. Another mystery lies in the presence of the Y signal, a genetic trace in some South American groups that appears linked to populations in Australasia. How this signal arrived, whether through ancient population structure in Asia or contact across the Pacific, remains unknown. These unresolved questions remind us that Beringia's legacy is not a closed story, but one still unfolding. On the planetary scale, the flooding of Beringia represents a larger pattern of lost worlds that shaped human history. Just as the Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, Doggerland in Europe, and other coastal plains vanished beneath rising seas, Beringia was erased from the map by the end of the Ice Age. The disappearance of these land bridges closed chapters of human migration, isolating populations, and defining the boundaries of continents. In each case, what remains are echoes in genetics, in cultural memory, and in the archaeological traces left behind. The loss of Beringia fits into this global rhythm of exposure and submergence driven by glacial cycles, a reminder of how closely human history is tied to planetary change. To grasp the scale of Beringia's disappearance, one can imagine a landmass larger than modern France, filled with rivers, plains, and valleys, supporting herds of mammoth and bison dotted with human camps, and then gradually swallowed by the sea. Within a few millennia, this entire world was gone, replaced by a narrow strait of turbulent water. For the descendants of those who lived there, the land became memory carried not in maps or monuments, but in bodies, traditions, and lineages. Archaeological evidence at the margins provides glimpses of what once existed. In Alaska, sites such as Swan Point and Upward Sun River preserve tools and burials, dating to the final millennia of Beringian life. In Siberia, sites like Ushki record similar traditions, hinting at connections across the land bridge. These fragments suggest continuity, but also leave vast gaps, as the heart of Beringia now lies beneath the sea. The absence itself is an echo, a silence in the record that speaks to what has been lost. Genetics deepens the picture, showing how echoes of Beringia extend into the present. Studies reveal that indigenous peoples of the Americas share ancestry that can be traced back to the standstill, Yet they also show evidence of adaptation to new environments after dispersal. Genes associated with high-altitude adaptation appear in Andean populations, while Arctic groups show traits linked to cold tolerance. These later developments are layered upon the foundation laid in Beringia, demonstrating how ancient lineages carried forward while continuing to evolve in new contexts. Daily life in Beringia during the standstill, though long gone, can be imagined through the traces that remain. Families lived in shelters of hide and bone, hunted herds across open plains, fished rivers, and gathered plants in brief summers. Fires burned in hearths ringed with stone children, learned to shape tools and recognize tracks, and elders passed on knowledge of seasons and migrations. When the land disappeared, these ways of life did not vanish, but were carried southward, adapted to new landscapes. The echoes of Beringia are thus not only genetic, but cultural, preserved in practices that continued in different forms throughout the Americas. The sensory memory of Beringia might have lingered too in stories and oral traditions. While direct accounts cannot be recovered, the persistence of flood myths among indigenous peoples worldwide raises the possibility that memories of rising seas and lost lands endured for generations. If so, then the submergence of Beringia may have been remembered long after the land was gone, an echo not only in science, but in human storytelling. In the long view, Beringia represents both connection and separation. It was the bridge that allowed humans to enter the Americas, but its disappearance ensured that populations there would develop independently, creating the extraordinary diversity of cultures and traditions that later flourished. Its legacy is visible in every indigenous community of the Americas, in languages spoken, genes inherited, and traditions practiced. The echoes of Beringia continue to shape how we understand human history, reminding us that even vanished lands leave lasting imprints. The story of Beringia is thus not only about what once was, but also about what endures. Though the land is gone, its influence persists across continents and through millennia. It is a reminder that human history is written not only in surviving artifacts and visible landscapes, but also in what has been lost, remembered only through traces. In the end, the echo of Beringia is the echo of humanity itself, resilient, adaptive, and enduring even in the face of worlds erased by time.